So first of all, we're going to open up our photo. We're going to save it as Rose Painting, and we're going to change the file into a Photoshop PSD file. Save that. Next, we're going to duplicate the background layer to paint on, and you're just going to name it Rose Painting. Click OK. Now you can see that we have two layers, and we will be painting on the rose painting layer. First thing we're going to do is quick select the entire rose. This way we are only painting on the rose and selecting the color ranges only from the rose. We're going to select the shadows. Where it's white is where our selection will be, and as you can see, it is adjustable. We chose 100 for how much of our shadows we will be selecting. Next, you're going to get your mixer brush underneath the brush tool. You're going to use the first soft round brush, and you're going to change your brush color to, with the eyedropper tool, the darkest shade of pink on the outside of the rose. We're going to set our mixer brush to dry, this way none of it mixes and it just paints onto the rose where our darkest parts are. You're just going to fill all of the selected shadows in. Next, we're going to pick a lighter pink just to create sort of an ombre effect, and you're going to paint that on the inner edges of the shadows just so it's not such a harsh line. You're going to deselect the shadows. Next, you're going to quick select your rose again, and we're going to select the highlights this time. You're going to go to color range and switch the color to highlights. And again, white is what our highlights will be, and we want to get where the lightest yellow shades are on the rose, not necessarily the lightest colors. Only the ones where light yellow shows up. We're going to click OK. Next, we're going to go back to our mixer brush underneath the brush tool, and we're going to use the eyedropper tool to select a light shade of yellow from the rose. I chose sort of a medium light yellow, so that way it's balanced throughout the entire rose, because it is lighter in some spots and darker in some spots. So I thought a medium base would be good for the highlight. You're just going to paint all of your selection. You're going to deselect. Next, you're going to quick select the entire rose again. And now we're going to set color range, and we're going to do the midtones this time. You can adjust how many highlights and how much of your shadows you want to see. I made mine very close together just because we already did these shadows and we already did the highlights, so really we just need to get the midtones, where it's mostly orange, like a peachy orange shade on the rose. I referred back to the image and with the white selecting to see where it was like peachy orange. We're going to go back to our mixer brush and we are going to get a peachy dark orangish color. We're going to go to dry light load just because we are loading onto like we've already painted on our shadows and our highlights, and so just a light load of this orange just as a filler kind of. Now the flower is kind of ombre, so we are going to select a lighter color to kind of put around the highlights, and just that way it looks less harsh, and we will blend it out later. We're going to deselect the rose, and now we can refer back to the base image as to what all we've painted. We're going to quick select the rose again, just so we're only painting and blending on the rose. We're going to change our brush setting to very wet, light mix, and we're going to start off by blending the midtones. I started from the lightest and brought that into the midtones. Up at the top, I selected the icon clean brush after every stroke. Just so that the colors that I'm picking up aren't transferring throughout, and the highlights will blend better because it won't have such dark colors on top of it. As you can see here, I messed up and I got rid of the highlight, which we're going to undo. I tried to edit it petal by petal to keep the depth of the petals, not mixing it all into one thing. Trying to keep the shadows where they lie. Now we're switching our brush to very wet, heavy mix. Now we're going to choose a darker tone to start creating an ombre effect with the shadows. We're going to start blending in the shadows. We will get darker as we add more depth, but first we're just going to blend in this orangish color with the midtones that we just blended. Be careful not to go too far outside the edge, or else you will bring in the background colors and it'll mix with your already like pinkish colors. The browns will mix in and it won't turn out very pretty. Now we're going to go darker to just continue adding depth where the rose should be darker. Now we're going to blend the highlights. I blended the highlights last so that the color will mix onto the already darker colors and stuff. So that way it just continually blends on top of everything instead of being washed away if you were to do it first. Now we're just going to blend some more of the mid-tone since it does look, we're going to be blending the midtones and the highlights because it does look very choppy. It's not blended very well. We're just adding some in-between colors between the highlights and the midtones. Now we're just going to refer back to the base image to see how close we are with the petals and see if we need to add more depth. See, we're losing this petal with all the blending that we're doing, so we're just going to go back in and define that front petal just a little bit more using that darker color and just bringing it in and making sure that it's outlining the petals correctly. Now we're just going to blend in some more of the shadows just to add more depth to the outside of the petals. I just changed the load so that way I'm not putting on too dark of the colors. Since it just needs a little bit more darker to the outsides and whatnot. Again, referring back to the base image to see where it needs some contour to the petals, like where the darker colors need to go. Doing so will make the painting end up looking much more realistic and much more like the base photo. As you can see on the left side, we did lose that line between that back petal and also that petal in front, which we will get to later. Again, just messing with the loads, depending on how much paint, how much more tint we want to put while mixing. With a lighter load and very wet, heavy mix on, you won't be putting that much pigment. You need to be on dry to put on more pigment. That's why you need to increase the load in order to get more color. We're just going to save that real quick since we just did all that painting. We're just going to look into some more details. We're going to change the size of the brush. And we're going to start adding vein details. Roses and leaves and most plants have veins going through them and they distribute water and whatnot, and so we were just trying to imitate this by doing light strokes in the direction that the petal is going. So for that centerpiece, the petal is going upwards. For that left one, it's going down to the left. It just depends. You can refer back to the vase photo for which way the veins are going. You'll have to play around with it a little bit and making sure you aren't blending it too much. I found that bringing out the darker color and then bringing the lighter color into it created a nice vein effect, as you can see here. I'm just pulling out that darker color and then pulling the lighter color into it, and then it ends up making lighter strokes. I noticed that my veins were a little bit too big for how light that I wanted them, so I just adjusted the brush size. You can do so accordingly. Now we're just going to select a darker orange color just to add some more depth. A peachy orange, I should say. And we're just going to change to wet heavy mix. Not very wet heavy mix, wet heavy mix. So it's not so runny, like the paint is putting on more pigment onto the painting. Now we are going to fix the loss of that petal. As I said before, we're just going to add more depth to bring that petal back out, just like in the picture. We're just going to separate it from the other two petals. We're going to save that. We're going to deselect our flower. And now we're going to start on the background. We are going to use dry, and we just use the eyedropper tool to select a green color, and we made it lighter so that the leaves closest to the camera are lighter, and we just use the eyedropper tool accordingly, making it darker as it got further away from the camera. There are a bunch of indescribable details in the background. We can't get a solid line of all of the leaves that are back there, so we just added our light green shade accordingly to the stems, to the lighter shades of green that we can see. Now we're just going to outline our leaves with a darker color and fill in where the picture is a little bit less descriptive, and also where darker parts of the leaves are in the background. Now we're just going to go add some details to the stems and to the leaves. We're going to add the stems to the leaves, like the veins, and also the thorns to the stems. We're going to make a smaller brush for the inside lines of the leaves where the veins branch out from the leaves. Now we're going to go to change our brush setting to very wet, heavy mix. And we're going to start off by blending the leaves, blending the full color of the leaves, and we're not going to mess with the stems yet. For the indescribable background where you can't really distinguish anything, we're just going to run our brush over it. We're also going to blend in the stems and the thorns in the background so that way they look further away from the camera since they're a little bit less out of focus, kind of blurring them with the mixer. The last thing that we're going to do is paint small brush strokes, starting at the brown of the stem that we painted on outwards from the leaf to make it look like veins and make it less of a harsh line. You see it better on the leaf that we are working on now since it is closer to the camera. The last thing we need to do is blend in that stem that the rose is sitting on. Refer back to the base image to see how your painting has turned out. Save and close your file.